All right, we welcome in Tom Bogert. Thomas, my friend, coming to us evidently from the great state of New Jersey, from some sort of grotto or lair or headquarters with all of the information. You look wonderful, my friend. Slick back hair, mustache, all its glory. We're going to talk to you about a bunch of different things, but first one, a big picture type of thing. When it comes to breaking news, I've always been fascinated by people that do this, and I do think that it takes a special type of person to be able to do it well, and to enjoy doing it. How did you get into it, and is it as exhausting as it seems from the outside?
How did I get into it? That's a good question. So I learned pretty quickly, maybe 13, 14. I was pretty good at soccer, but I went down on a trip to play against River Plate's U15 team. It was actually coached by the U.S. legend himself, Tab Ramos. In training with that team and then playing against River Plate's U15, I realized I wasn't going pro. So that laid all these foundations to get into the media game. But with the information game, I was pushed by an editor who knew better than me to do it. It was kind of against my will because I was afraid. You're only as good as your sources, all that crap. And I wanted to think that my opinions always mattered on talking about the game, having tactical views or whatever. And he said, no, I think you have a knack for this. I think you're good at this. Just trust me. So I was pushed against my will to it. And to this day, I owe it all to Simon Borg, MLS legend.
Tom, Neymar has gone back to Brazil to play for Santos on a 5-month deal, which means theoretically he could be available again in the summer. You reported that the Chicago Fire made a run at him. How serious was that? Do you think Neymar ever considered it? And do you think MLS will be a factor for him if he does leave Santos in the summer?
It was for sure serious, and I was careful when I was reporting that out to say that preliminary, they are not the only team, but they are the team in MLS that is trying. And again, not every club in the world, if they have an interest, actually has a path towards signing Neymar. They believe they did. They convinced him enough for a meeting and to talk about it. But from kind of what I heard, he always really wanted to go to Santos. And since he made that decision, since that deal went official, yes, the contract length is very interesting. So it's to the summer with an option to extend 12 months. That option takes you to the 2026 World Cup. I think that is on purpose. So I would expect him to stay at Santos after this summer, but he's giving himself an out just in case he needs it in the summer. But he's got his both eyes on the World Cup. That he is completely focused on that. And I think it makes more sense for him to stay at Santos until the World Cup. But guess what? 2026, that summer, I think we're going to be talking about Neymar again.
One thing that we're talking about when it comes to Major League Soccer, obviously, is Inter Miami and Messi. And having been around an organization many years ago before you were born, and seeing the hurricane that can be a massive star. In that case, it was David Beckham. You know, we're hearing all sorts of interesting things when it comes to Miami, and we're seeing changes both on and off the field. What does this Inter Miami in 2025 look like relative to the previous one? And is there a power shift or a power imbalance when it comes to Messi and the decisions that are being made both on and off the field down there?
Yeah, I mean, let's just look at the facts of what has changed recently that I reported. Raul Sanelli was the director of football. He came previously of Barcelona, of Arsenal, of Real Zaragoza, which is owned by Inter Miami owner Jorge Mas. So he was the director of football. Well, a couple weeks ago, that changed. And now he doesn't work in that office anymore. And this comes after that there was an exchanging of words on a team bus between Raul Sanelli and Lionel Messi. And guess what? A couple days later, I find out that Guillermo Hoyos is the new director of football, and he is the guy that has the final decision-making power. Guillermo Hoyos Messi calls him his footballing godfather. It's somebody he's been close with since he was coached by him at the Barcelona Academy, and he came to Miami shortly after Messi did 18 months ago. So you can just read between the lines there. That is obviously Messi's guy. I don't know exactly what happened to make that change or what the decision was. Inter Miami, in a club statement, told me that the moves were pre-planned, but I got to tell you that is not exactly what I'm hearing from everybody across the league and within that club.
Tom, at one point last season, there was a lot of talk that Inter Miami aside, MLS lacked global star power. And then Royce and Giroud arrived in the summer, and there's a lot of talk now about Griezmann and De Bruyne in 2025. Do you think in the lead up to the World Cup, we are going to see a wave of big foreign stars coming to MLS?
I'm not sure about a wave, but I will say around that World Cup, whether it's before or a little bit after, because I do think that there are a lot of players that will come here during the World Cup and have either preconceived notions shattered, and where it's like, oh my God, like look at these facilities, look at everything else, or some of the players who had their eyes on, hey, maybe it'd be cool to go to MLS. They're here for the World Cup, and that sticks. The other side of that is, we were talking about Neymar. That's why I think that he stays at Santos until the World Cup, because he's focused on that 2026 World Cup. There are a lot of players, like, let's say you're in the England national team. It's unlikely that you come to MLS and then you still have a chance to be on that World Cup team. Well, after the World Cup, there might be players who stay. As for Americans, I do believe that we're going to see one, maybe two players from this current team that are going to come back to MLS. I think it's going to be very, very lucrative. You think of Clint Dempsey and you think of Michael Bradley, Josie Altidore before 2014. I think that there's a probability that happens for a couple players before the 2026 World Cup, because I know MLS will be incentivized to want that happen, to want to have some American stars in the league before the World Cup starts. And then I think, again, after that, when there's, say, players that maybe it was their last World Cup, whether they're from America or elsewhere, that stay around MLS and are interested and want to stay in the league.
So you're saying you think that current U.S. men's national team players that are playing in Europe will be coming back before the 26th World Cup and after the 26th World Cup. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I would say specifically for Americans that I do believe that there will be a couple before the World Cup. I've heard, like, let's say FC Cincinnati came really close to Josh Sargent. FC Cincinnati came really close to Weston McKennie. FC Cincinnati has an open DP spot. I don't know if they're going to fill it this winter or not, but you look at the summer, Josh Sargent is a guy that I think makes a lot of sense for teams if they want if they can spend that money. St. Louis wants him. Chicago Fire have a DP spot open. Greg Berhalter as a manager, I'm sure that there are players that he would maybe want to bring along to this club, but any team with big money and big ambitions, I could see them going for, again, McKennie, Josh Sargent. Haji Wright is a name that I think could make sense. You can go on down the list. Luca Della Torre already came back. We'll see exactly who it is, but I firmly believe that.
Do you see any of the machinations and the rules and regulations changing? I mean, hell, we've already seen here with Jovic and the ability now where there's intra MLS transfers that involve money, actual money, as opposed to TAM and GAM. Do you see more of that happening as we barrel towards 2026? And what would you like to see change when it comes to the way MLS runs its business? We'd love to spend other people's money, but if you were in charge.
No, that's such a good point, Lex. Like, we all talk about this with teams. Like, there is going to be some room between, sustainability and but also not spending crazy, like, a Chelsea of the past or the Saudi League, right? Like, there's something in the middle. There can be more ambition, but we're not going to survive if we run it like that. So I do think that there will be changes. I don't know exactly what. They will probably be in the form of new rules. And again, like the internal cash trade market, instead of it just being called transfers, they have their own reasons. That's whatever. But it would be something like that where maybe it sounds a little complicated, but it'll be real. What I want to see, and I talk to sporting directors, and every time I ask this kind of question, the vast majority responds the same. Just give us a hard salary cap. Call it 20 million, whatever you want to say the number is, something like that, and 2 DP spots, and 8 international slots, and that's it. No more allocation money, no more this, no U22, whatever, right? Like, give us the flexibility to spend on this, because you look at a club like Atlanta United right now. One, they have all of the money they could ever want. They've always been one of the most ambitious clubs, financially especially. But right now, they just got $45 to $50 million in the summer. They can't spend it on the entire roster. So they spend on Miguel Marón, Emmanuel Latsai-Lath, and they already have Alexi Miranchuk from the summer. What would be probably more beneficial is maybe you just sign Al Marón for big money, or one of those three, and then instead of just 3 players you're spending on, it's roster spots 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because that is the difference between the biggest Mexican teams and the biggest MLS teams, because those biggest Mexican teams, they've got 9 DPs because they don't have restrictions on all those slots.
Why don't you think that MLS does that? Is it just a vestige of the power struggle and the worry that there weren't enough people in charge that were going to make the right types of decisions if you gave them the opportunity to spend that type of money?
Yeah, I mean, this league has been resistant or hesitant to change. What they say is that they're being careful. They don't want anything to be knee-jerk. They don't want to change for the sake of changing, or just change on a whim where in a couple years maybe it doesn't make sense. I think that has bitten them a little bit of how slow that they've been with Lionel Messi coming, and we were expecting changes more before the start of 2024. That didn't really come, and everybody I talked to said there's big changes. There are bigger discussions coming for 25. I'm still told bigger discussions moving forward. That's where, Paul Tenorio of The Athletic was the first to report that the league is seriously considering changing the calendar. Like, that would be a huge change, and I understand that can't go overnight. But Alexi, like, these roster rules, they can be changed overnight, and sometimes they are. Like last winter, there was momentum for the change between the DPs and the U22 initiative stuff, and that didn't get passed. Well, some teams, Charlotte FC are one. Charlotte FC signed a player, Liel Abada, as a young DP. Back when that meant they wanted to have 3 U22 initiative slots. 2 months after he was signed, they finally did pass that you don't need to have a young DP. You could have 3 senior DPs and 3 U22 initiative players. So Charlotte's like, well, we made an $8 million decision based on the current rules, and then they got changed a few months later.
They got screwed.
Tom, you mentioned Almiron coming back to Atlanta. When Atlanta sold him to Newcastle for triple the amount they had spent for him, everybody thought that was going to usher in this new era in which MLS was going to serve as this bridge to Europe for young South Americans and make a huge profit on those players. I've actually argued on this podcast MLS hasn't been as successful with that as some people make it seem. I look at the fact that guys like Tati Castellanos and Thiago Mata had to take sort of a roundabout path to Europe. Facundo Torres just moved to Palmeiras. Even guys like Brenner, they went for a fee into a club that you thought, well, it would have been just the same if they had just left straight from their home country. Now, we're taping this on a Monday. There's a Cucho Hernandez deal right now in the works that might undercut my argument. But generally speaking, do you think I'm being harsh there? How successful do you think MLS has been with this bridge to Europe strategy?
I think it's been successful, but it's fair to critique. It's fair to say that, like, it's not been 100%, and particularly with the Miguel Almiron, like, what the league was doing so well, what was that deal, 2019 in Newcastle? The league had done so well in the previous years this is the best way to grow the league, to make it better, and then partake in the global transfer window. So what Atlanta then did and said, okay, well, we bought Miguel Almiron for whatever it was, $5 or $7 million, and sold him for $21 million up front, $19 million up front plus add-ons. Okay, well, what if we go get the best young player in South America, Zico Barco, $15 million. That didn't work out. They still ended up pretty much getting their money back, which I thought was very impressive. But you kind of go on down the list, and there's just a ceiling that teams are going to be paying for MLS players. Like, there is no statistical line that you could put. It was like, oh my God, that guy had 30 goals and 10 assists. It's like, yeah, well, like, there's still going to be a cap of like 25 million, right? Like, John Duran is probably the best recent success story. He was bought for like $2 million by Chicago Fire. He was here for a year, and they sold him for $18 million up front, and that was huge. But that record, the record of Miguel Almiron and then Thiago Mata set a new one. That was $21 million up front. They bought him for $16.5 million. So just the return on investment percentage-wise, like, it isn't the same as a Miguel Almiron one, just because, again, like, there is a limit that European clubs will spend on an MLS player. They need to show stats other places. Like, yeah, I guess you could loan somebody abroad and then you get maybe a bigger fee. But, like, I think that with Miguel Almiron, when that happened, we were like, wow, like, where is the ceiling here? What if there are better, higher caliber players that come to MLS? And it's like, oh, like, teams aren't going to be spending beyond 25, 30 million.
Real quick, before I want to turn to some Open Cup discussion, Mosse mentioned the deal for Cucho, the potential deal. Again, we're recording this on a Monday to Real Betis. Rumored $16 million. When you look at that, and Mosse was explaining to me this, you ever heard of this basketball player, Mr. Doncic? Is that his name? Evidently, he's in the news right now. Mosse was explaining to me about all the different way people are looking at this and framing this deal. Would that be a good deal if it ended up being for $16 million? Not just the money part of it, but losing, arguably your best player, a star in the league. Is that a good deal for MLS?
I go back and forth on this one, and I think that these are all nuanced. I think these are all case by case, because yes, in general, they signed him for $10 million, and part of the pitch when they signed him was, come here, you're going to be a star, you're going to play well, you're going to play all the time, and we trust us, we believe you can get back in the Colombian national team, and also we'll sell you back on to Europe because we know where your ambitions lie. So that's all fair. If you just look at it through that lens, yes, this is really good. Maybe you would have wanted some more money, but Columbus Crew, I was told, have a significant sell-on clause as part of this Cucho Hernandez deal. So they're assuming that Real Betis in a couple years will then sell him on. They believe that there is another ceiling for him to burst through, and there will be another fee, just like Chicago got on John Duran. The other side of this is, from my reporting, about a month ago, I was told Cucho Hernandez would be ready to stay with the new contract. And he wasn't being entirely unreasonable on that contract. Maybe his mind changed as Real Betis, and I don't know what the other offers were. I know other teams were in for him. But the second I heard it, second it got back to me, if I was a GM or an owner of that club, I'm turning around saying, let's get this contract done right now. Tell everybody else, you hang up the phone if they're calling about Cucho Hernandez. If he wants to stay, if he's happy, if he wants to be here, give him a new deal. It would, if I had to, like, there was a rumor that Botafogo were trying to sign him, and he was asking for $8 million per year. That was not true. I can tell you with 100% certainty that was not true. He was not asking for that. So even if we're being conservative, we call it $5 million a year. That's like, I don't know, 6th to 12th best paid player in MLS. He was second in MVP voting last year. He loves this city. The town loves the city loves him. Everything worked out perfectly. The coach and him and I would just keep this going as long as I possibly could. And if him saying I would stay with the new contract, I'd be writing a new contract.
All right. As I mentioned, U.S. Open Cup, the cluster that is the U.S. Open Cup, especially over the last couple of years and in particular relative to Major League Soccer. Thoughts on, is it relevant to MLS, to U.S. soccer? When I say U.S. soccer, not capital U.S. soccer, but just the U.S. soccer landscape in general right now. And what needs to be done if you are a lover of the U.S. Open Cup in order to make it more relevant going forward?
Smarter people than me are trying to figure out the answer to that question. I mean, what I'll say is, first and foremost, obviously as a fan as well, like, yes, it's an improvement that I think 16 MLS teams are in the Open Cup this year. While that's nice, it should always be all of the teams. What I think that could help is if MLS and the MLSPA agreed on ways to have better mobility between the second team and the academy with the Open Cup games, that there'd be exceptions. I understand that maybe the MLSPA wouldn't love that because they don't want the players getting taken advantage of or more free labor. I understand, again, smarter people than me are in these discussions, but just from the outside and kind of a base level, I think that's one way to alleviate the concerns about fixture congestion and everything else, and you only get so many short-term call-ups for these players, and you need to have X amount of players rostered, like whatever, right? Like, all American MLS clubs should be in the Open Cup every single year. There shouldn't be a question. There shouldn't be a debate. I like the idea of caring about player safety and limiting the fixture congestion. Don't do best of 3 first-round playoffs. I don't know. That's just an idea off the top of my head. So there are ways that you could get around this without sacrificing the Open Cup.
Tom, to hop back to the transfer market for 1 second, we know you mostly focus on MLS, but you also have your eye on U.S. national team players abroad. It was actually a quiet window in that regard. Looking ahead to the summer, we know Pepe just signed a new deal at PSV. You've got Gio Reyna unsettled at Dortmund, Matt Turner situation at Crystal Palace. Who's the one U.S. national team player you most have your eye on for a potential summer move?
So I'll give you a few because that's just how I talk. Instead you ask for one, I'll just talk for a while on a few. So Weston McKennie. Are we going to do this thing all over again with a new manager or the current manager saying, I don't want him here, and then he wins them back? Is he actually going to leave or not? That's one. I talked about Josh Sargent before. That's another. Like, he's been excellent for Norwich City. What happens at the end of the season with him in this club? Does he go on to the Premier League? Does he go to MLS? I don't know. Gio Reyna that's probably the biggest one because he's the most talented of all these players. I don't know what happens, right? Like, I want him to be somewhere where he's fit and able to play. So first and foremost, that starts with his body. Is he going to be able to play all of these minutes? And hopefully the injury concerns in the past, we'll see. We need him to be somewhere that is playing regularly and continuing to grow, continuing to show all of his talent. And then you talked about Matt Turner. Yeah, we don't want him to be the backup for Crystal Palace, and we certainly don't want him to be third string, maybe fourth string by now at Nottingham. I don't know. They sign a goalkeeper every few weeks, so I haven't checked in on if they've signed another goalkeeper, which would push Matt Turner further down the pecking order. What's difficult here is he would be a guy who makes sense to come back to MLS, but he's probably making more money than $1.7 million in England, and I use that as a number because he would need to be a DP if he's making that much more money in MLS. So I understand the financial side of things would be really tough for him to come back. So hopefully there's a solution. There was a German team and a Spanish team who wanted to sign him on loan in the summer. Nottingham Forest were saying, we don't want to sanction a loan deal. We won't do it. So those two teams moved on to other targets. And then on deadline day or the day before, they said, all right, we'd be maybe okay with the loan. That's how the Crystal Palace move happened. The idea wasn't for him to go be a backup somewhere. But I was like, all right, this is better than being third string, I guess.
All right, Tom Bogert, we're going to finish it up here. I got a couple of... Oh, wait, Mosse has one more question. Then I want to wrap up with a couple. Go ahead.
Can I ask a non-soccer question as
Absolutely.
my last question? Tom, you and I have the same favorite NBA team. Would you trade Mitch Robinson, or would you bank on him actually getting healthy and providing some depth the rest of the season? What do you think? The trade deadline in the NBA this week.
I hope Mitch can come back healthy. I like it, but if he's not, what are you gonna get for him anyway? So it's a tough crossroads, but I still think that this team can go up another level with Mitch Robinson's defense. So I keep him. Go Knickerbockers.
He plays for the Knickerbockers of New York.
Correct.
Yes, I've heard of them. Yes. All right, Tom. The favorite story that you've ever broken?
Probably Gareth Bale. That was the biggest one. LAFC.
The story that you didn't break, but you almost broke it, and you got pipped at the final hour there.
I feel like that there's been a few, or I'd be, waiting on the phone. I'd be on the phone with somebody telling me as I'm typing it up. I see Fabrizio Romano or somebody pulls it up. So there's been a few of those. I try not to focus on them, or I'll get mad because I'm super competitive, and that's a way to get upset. So nothing is coming to mind right now.
What is your way of breaking stories in terms of confirmation, in terms of sources? How many are there?
Multiple sources and primary. So this isn't the kit man telling me something he heard in the locker room or the janitor seeing something on a piece of paper. These are as close to primary sources as possible.
You ever been burned on a story?
I've never been burned. I have a really good detector of when I'm either being misled or embellished. I'm sure that there's been some stories that it's been heavily spun to me, but this is why you do multiple sources.
When you do press send, post, whatever it ends up being with that, do you get a jolt of electricity that goes through your body?
Depends. There's that, but I have a unhealthy amount of anxiety, I'd say, which a little healthy amount of anxiety is why I have a good detector of what could this person's angle be, what are they messing with me. But the unhealthy side of the anxiety, and this has gotten at least a little bit better with time, but the unhealthy side is, what if 3 people were all lying to me and saying the same thing independent of each other, and that's just what's happening right now, and it's not really going to happen. So those are what happens. It's the good and the bad.
All right, last question, and I ask everybody that's involved in soccer, and you, my friend, are involved in soccer, and thank you so much for spending time, and I think this is your first time on the show, so introducing yourself.
I finally got the call up.
I know, listen, we're so happy to have you here, but I ask everybody this, and I'm always interested in what people say. Best thing and worst thing about American soccer. It could be big picture, small picture, on the field, off the field. Give me the best and worst thing about American soccer.
Best thing is the supporter culture. Going to these games, being at these games, it's really beautiful. Not to get too serious or romantic about it, but being at some of these big events, it's just unbelievable. Seeing like LA Galaxy for the final, Alexi, like back in the day when they were all conquering. I wasn't old enough. This was the first time I was in the Galaxy Stadium, and all the history there and what it was like just completely blew me away. So that would be the best. Worst thing for me is maybe that it's too slow to take off training wheels per se. That was an argument for a few years, so I'll kind of say that.
Awesome. Mosse, anything before we go?
Let me just say, if I ever leave the State of the Union podcast, I'm going to leak the story to Tom first so he can report it.
There we go. Well, he's going to need confirmation. Deal. He's going to need a second source, so he can come to me for that. Hey, listen, you got work to do, my friend. Hopefully, we'll see you at some point out there on the road. Do you want to let anybody where they can find you? Tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, just Tom Bogert on social media. I do a podcast called Soccer Wise. It's a lot of fun. You could check that one out. And I'm anywhere that there's soccer information, soccer tweets. I'm sure you'll find me.
You like that clip? Well, my State of the Union podcast drops twice a week right here on my very own YouTube page. The only way to stay up to date is to hit that subscribe button down below. Size the day, and see you soon.